the United States is expanding the nuclear arms race and has been for a few years, into a three-way competition versus kind of the more Cold War rivalry. China is now being brought into the fold. Speak a bit about that and what that development means and looks like.
So the United States did not think of China as a major nuclear foe until very recently. China had a very small nuclear arsenal, a few hundred nuclear munitions altogether, compared to about 5,000 in the U.S. arsenal. And so it wasn't treated as a major worry. But China has been building up its nuclear arsenal probably in response to growing U.S. military buildup, a growing U.S. military buildup in the Pacific area, which China finds very threatening and fears that the U.S. might use nuclear weapons. So China has, just in the past few years, expanded its nuclear arsenal. And this has given warhawks in the United States a reason, a justification to accelerate the nuclear buildup already underway.
Can you speak about the expansion of United States presence in and around China's borders and how that began and how that was taken as a provocation that sparked much of this, as you describe?
So the U.S., of course, has historically viewed Russia, before that the Soviet Union, as the greatest threat to American security. But in recent years, as China has developed economically and technologically and so on, the U.S. has come to view China as a greater threat, as a growing threat, and sees it even more so in the future if China continues its military and economic buildup, its rise. And so as the Afghanistan war was dragging on, the Biden administration already made plans to shift the focus of U.S. military planning to the Pacific. And you see new military ties with the Philippines, with South Korea, with Japan, with Australia. All this looks like containment to the Chinese, like the U.S. is trying to surround it with hostile military forces, and created a lot of anxiety. And of course, there's the issue of Taiwan. The U.S. increasingly views Taiwan as an ally, and China views Taiwan as a province of China. So tensions over Taiwan have increased enormously.
Certainly. And we were quite critical on our program of Nancy Pelosi going and visiting there, and for quite recklessly, in my opinion, ramping up tensions by going around China to recognize Taiwan in that way, regardless of what you feel about Taiwanese how you feel about Taiwanese independence. It's just quite an irresponsible provocation in the midst of this kind of new Cold War mentality as it relates to China.
And that kind of provocation continues. Representative Mike Gallagher, who chairs the House Committee on the Communist Party of the People's Republic of China. This is a new committee set up to investigate China and to create legislation that would isolate China and increase U.S. support for Taiwan, is in Taiwan now or just visited or on his way. But he's an outspoken critic of China's claims over Taiwan and calling for more U.S. military aid to Taiwan. And this is certainly going to stir up tensions again, the way Nancy Pelosi's visit did.
More military aid to Taiwan. What does that mean for China domestically? And you know, since Taiwan is considered a province of Greater China, the United States prioritizing sending them weapons within what China considers their own territory you can understand why that is maybe something that perhaps the United States shouldn't prioritize.
This is such a contentious issue now in Washington because so many people, both Democrats and Republicans, believe that we should arm Taiwan to the death so that it could fight off a Chinese invasion, or more realistically, the argument goes that Taiwan should be able to hold out for a week or so until the U.S. could enter the fight. Nobody believes that Taiwan could defend itself exclusively on its own, that if a war were to break out between Taiwan and China, the U.S. would inevitably come to its assistance, and then you'd have a major superpower war, the U.S. versus China, which in my mind very likely would end in the use of nuclear weapons.
And I guess that's where we turn to that risk. In your piece, you lay out these I think four or so nuclear flashpoints, 4 or 5, about where further proliferation, nuclear escalation could reemerge in some of these hotspots. We've touched on Taiwan, but you also mentioned Ukraine and NATO expanding and what that means with regards to Russia.
Well, I like you say, I named 4 current nuclear flashpoints. I think there will be more in the future. One is Taiwan, as you say. Another is Europe and the expansion of NATO to include Finland and Sweden, which extends NATO's perimeter to Russia's Arctic region, which is a new area of contestation. And then you have the South China Sea. We don't hear as much about the South China Sea as we do about Taiwan, but this is a very dangerous, precarious area because the Chinese are constantly, well, the Chinese claim the whole area as their territory, which in my mind is a bit of a stretch, but they use their naval forces to bully or to harass fishing boats from the Philippines, from Vietnam, and so on. And the U.S. has pledged to come to the aid of those ships. And there have been repeated clashes between Philippine ships and Chinese ships. And this could be another spark for escalation that could lead to a major U.S.-China war. And then, of course, there's North Korea, which is constantly on the verge of a major clash and the use of nuclear weapons.
Can you expand on that North Korean threat there and basically how it relates to the United States and South Korea?
So, the war between Korea, South Korea, the Republic of Korea, the ROK, and North Korea, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the DPRK, that conflict never ended. There's just a ceasefire between the two sides and a demilitarized zone, but never a peace treaty. And hostilities have continued ever since. And you have a dynasty in the north, the Kim dynasty, led by the grandson of the founder of the Kim dynasty, who more than ever relies on nuclear weapons to maintain his legitimacy and to intimidate the population and rally the population. And he's constantly testing new weapons and has threatened to use nuclear weapons against the South if there's any provocation. And the U.S. has 30-something thousand troops there, and they could be involved in a conflict at any moment with the North Korean forces. If there were to be an incident, and these incidents occur all the time, so that could be another location for an incident that sparks the use of nuclear weapons.
Well, the fact that the United States has around 750 military bases across the world per the last count I saw in Responsible Statecraft means that our not just our meddling and interference is all over the place, but that we have literally American troops stationed in so many places that if they are to die in some of these potential flare-ups, that also increases the possibility for incredibly deadly hostilities.
Absolutely, absolutely. My biggest fear, frankly, is that the U.S. Engages in a clash with Chinese naval forces, either off Taiwan or in the South China Sea or near Korea and Japan. And both sides, China and the U.S., constantly have naval maneuvers to, flex their muscles and intimidate the other side. These are going on constantly with U.S. aircraft carriers engaging in combat maneuvers off the coast of China. And the Chinese send out their planes and their ships to try to push the American ships away and vice versa. So these provocative maneuvers that also occur in the air, they're constant, and they could lead to unintended escalation. One side fires at the other side when they get too close, or there's a ramming by one side or the other in the South China Sea. All of these have precedents before, and the maneuvers are increasing in frequency. So that my fear is that an American ship will be sunk in one of these events, or American plane shot down, and then we'll have to retaliate against the Chinese, or it could go the other way around. But, it'll lead to higher and higher levels of escalation until one side or the other feels so threatened they use nuclear weapons. That's my fear, my biggest fear.
I share that fear, and the fact as well that the Biden administration has expanded military bases in the Philippines. They also presided over that arms deal. I forget what the acronym is, but with Australia.
Focus.
Oh, yes, exactly. So, I mean, those are that just increases the likelihood, does it not, over the past few years?
Well, it increases China's fear of encirclement. And the Chinese are proud people. They view this as a insult to their what they consider their legitimate rise to world-class status. And the Xi Jinping regime is feeding this nationalism to rouse the populace of China. So there's a lot of anger at the U.S. for all of these moves, which feel very threatening, and they're responding by building up their forces. But I think that the Biden administration, which, by the way, these tactics began with the Trump administration. So you see continuity between Trump and Biden. Biden has just accelerated what Trump started. And these moves are all very provocative. And if you see them from Beijing's point of view, they're very threatening and call for a response. Imagine if Chinese forces were building up off of the Pacific or the Atlantic coast,
right,
which is exactly what's happening.